we all like to play and to have fun with technology. There's there's actual cost, there's limits, and there's value that has to be associated with anything and everything we do, including hardware purchases. So we have to understand what it's going to cost, and then we've got to take that cost and be able to define and explain how this is going to help the business accomplish their goals and their endeavors. Otherwise, it's not worth it. It's very hard to actually kind of quantify cloud, TCO initially, because again, it goes into the direct versus indirect costs. So direct costs we can pretty much nail because what we're doing is we're running evaluations on virtual machine infrastructure, hardware, other things, and getting an idea of what their actual monthly run rate would be in a cloud technology or a cloud platform. But the problem is indirect costs associated with that migration or that movement. So that could be something as simple as variable costs, such as network transfer, storage, and burstable cost. But there's also the training cost, the resource cost that's got to be considered, because managing a cloud environment, while it's arguably maybe a little bit more simple, it's different. And that's the key thing is, if you have resources, within your organization that are experts at managing what you have today, it's done with a certain set of tooling that may not necessarily work when you move into the cloud, or maybe manages it differently than what it does in the cloud. An overall difference in operation and difference in how you conduct business in cloud versus on-premises. So that can take a little while to figure out how that integrates within your organization. There's a lot of things in on-premises that just don't exist with cloud. For example, one of the things that people don't necessarily consider is floor tile space, which is going to include air conditioning, heating, cooling, power, the man hours, the remote hand support to reboot your machines if you're not able to get to the integrated lights out management, and various other things that I think are indirect costs that a lot of people don't necessarily wrap into that, because I think a lot of people really understand the direct costs of total cost of ownership, but I think the indirects are a little bit different. Like for example, sales cycle. The sales cycle exists on the customer side and on the partner side. For example, let's say we buy a customer wants to buy a storage array. Well, there's architecture and engineering time that's got to go into designing the solution. There's negotiation time that has to go into, price negotiations, terms, contract agreements, and plus there's waiting for delivery, plus the rack and stack and installation, the burn-in testing, and then eventually, after some unknown period of time, you have the product up for you to use, and then you start to actually use it and make sure it meets your requirements. That could be weeks, that could be months, that can be quite a long amount of time. Cloud, it's a matter of standing up a storage technology. It's ready to use typically within a couple of minutes. You start testing it. If it doesn't work, you shut it down, you bring up something else, and you keep on testing until you find what fits. And that period of time is greatly less than probably even the amount of time you're waiting for the product to ship in a typical hardware cycle. So that costs you time and money. And it also delays any potential endeavor you're trying to stand up as you're going through this process. It may be, you have dev teams that are waiting to release a product. Maybe you have, business wanting to get into a new vertical or to release something into market, to try to get that little bit of time to define market. And now it's going to take you more time to do that in traditional infrastructure, which is possibly missed opportunity cost and other things. When transitioning to an OpEx model, if you're very used to a CapEx model, it may be difficult to transition because you're not exactly sure what your run rate is going to be. You could estimate, and I would recommend you overestimate. You have an idea of what your environment is going to look like in the cloud, maybe add 10 to 20% on top of that to account for any indirect costs that you may occur, like some of the variable cost, as far as network transfer and storage, transactions, and other things that you're not used to accounting for yet, and then see what the first year looks like. One of the probably most effective ways to use cloud or OpEx models is to start tagging resources and to get into a chargeback or at least a showback model with your expenses. That's something that is pretty easy to do in a CapEx model because you usually have a business sponsor that is driving the purchase for justification. However, in cloud, anybody can stand up anything without the appropriate governance and controls in place. So if a particular business unit or a particular division is responsible for the usage of resources, it's in everybody's best interest to tag those resources or to mark those resources through some method to show that this particular business unit is the one that is actually consuming these resources. Because then that makes the budget allocations a lot easier, because now a lot of the budget, or at least behind the scenes, has to come from the justification of not you as the IT manager, but as the business units for the consumption of their services.